people you talking about, they spent money on white women. They set up bars and they went playing pool and golf for $1,000 a hole, and they were known to make millions and millions when there wasn't no high taxes, and they were not hindered by white America. They were allowed to see the white America has completely closed all the doors on me. I'm not allowed to work in America, out of America. I was stopped right in my prime just when I started making money. So you can't compare me with nobody like Joe Lewis or nobody.
And if you are black, if you are brown, if you are indigenous, and if you are poor, this system is rigged and it is rotten to the core, and we gonna unbreak it. That's it. And that's all.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to another live segment of the Radical Democracy Show. I'm your host, Kamali Rose, and just want to thank everyone for joining me tonight. It's January 12th, and got some things on the mind that I want to discuss, hopefully debate it out with some of the folks that are here watching live. So please, if you have any thoughts, please share them in the chat over there. And we will get to as many of them as we can. So, all right. And as always, please, if you are just joining us, do us a favor and just immediately, please hit that like button down below, subscribe to the channel, and share this out on social media. Help us spread the word and to, grow the platform. All right. Appreciate that. And appreciate everyone that supports us and supports the show financially on Coffee or Patreon. You can head over to coffee.com, ko-fi.com/radical democracy. Just want to give a massive shout out to X for all of their contributions on on Coffee recently. X donated about $75 to us recently, and we were just absolutely floored by that. Just deeply appreciate it. Cannot thank you enough. It's what keeps this show going. So thank you to everyone that supports us. You can also support us on Patreon, patreon.com/radical democracy. Links are in the description box below. So please don't hesitate to help the show be allowed to continue to exist. All right. It's the only way that we're gonna make this thing happen. All right. We need your support, even if it's just $1. It is deeply helpful to an independent platform like ours. All right. So with no further ado, let's get to the topic of the night. As we all know, on January 6th, what started as a rally for Donald Trump turned into a riot at the U.S. Capitol. These people that were there protesting then stormed the Capitol. There were police, off-duty police, former military or an active duty military personnel as taking part in this. Many of them, they were in there. Some were just let right into the Capitol. Police just sort of ushered them in, took selfies with them. They walked throughout the Capitol. Some people carrying zip ties. No, as far as I understand, one police officer was killed by these, rioters, insurrectionists, seditionists, some would call them. And, so a police officer was killed. One of the U.S. Capitol police officers, another police officer, committed suicide. They don't know if there's any, direct connection to that, but another U.S. Capitol police officer in the wake of this committed suicide. Not sure if that's tied to it in any way. And then aside from those two, 4 other, of these protesters, rioters, that's what the topic of discussion is tonight, were, died of other means. One tased himself in the balls and died of a heart attack. So, a little bit of Darwinism there in play. And so, all right. So, the topic of tonight really is something that's been on my mind, and it's been weighing on my mind recently. And I've debated this out in private with some folks and wanted to take the discussion public because I think it is an important discussion to have. because of the implications around it, right? The question, if you can see in the title, is is it wise of us to be labeling the U.S. Capitol rioters, insurrectionists, the fascist insurrectionists as terrorists? In the wake of this, there have been many on the left, liberals in particular, have been using this term very freely, calling them terrorists. And what that seems to have led to is some actual calls to expand the carceral state, increase laws around domestic terrorism, and potentially even increasing funding to police. So that's what we want to talk about today. So let's get to it with no further ado here. The first thing that I want to share with you and to kick off the discussion here is a post from a lawyer who has represented people that the government views as terrorists. So this is Diala Shamas, and she posted this thread on Twitter. And so I just want us to check it out, hear from her directly, and then, we'll continue the discussion after that. All right. So here you can see, let's just pull it up. All right. So I'll keep me on here. So this is Diala Shamas, and she's at DIALASH on Twitter. And she says, I've represented people the government views as terrorists. Here's an incomplete set of reasons why calling yesterday terrorism is not a good idea. She's referring to the riots at the U.S. Capitol. All right. So she goes on to say, if the goal is to trigger accountability, the Department of Justice has plenty of tools to investigate, prosecute, or otherwise hold accountable those who conspired to break the laundry list of laws that were broken yesterday. I'll let those more prosecutorially minded list them out. The government regularly prosecutes activities it labels terrorism without ever actually charging a crime of terrorism. On the flip side, it charges not actually dangerous, but marginalized people with terrorism-related crimes all the time. And she links to a Human Rights Watch story on this and this phenomenon. It's called The Illusion of Justice, and you can check that out at humanrightswatch.org, hrw.org. We'll try to post links to it in the description below. Those aren't there right now. I apologize for that. So she goes on. While there, note how when they set their minds to it, FBI and DOJ have manufactured, quote, terrorists, deploying informants, entrapment, and the like, not just in Muslim communities, also Black liberation and other movements portrayed as, quote, terrorist. If the purpose is discursive, ask, what work does the terrorism word do? What did the war on terror designator do? It just stokes fear and clouds our ability to talk about root causes, understand different forms of violence and protest, and different relationships with the state. This then opens the door to, quote, terrorism experts, permits the deployment of anti-terrorism funding agencies, FBI, DHS, etc., that have repressive power and who do not share our goals. They will use their authorities, as they always have, to go after Black, brown, dissent, and protest. For example, we know the FBI knew about white supremacist infiltration of police departments for a very long time and has barely lifted a finger. And she links to a story in The Intercept. FBI document sheds light on white supremacist infiltration of law enforcement. This is a phenomenon we should all be familiar with by now. I hope everyone watching this knows that white supremacists have infiltrated the, law enforcement agencies throughout the country. I don't even know how we even play the game of saying they infiltrated. Let's be fucking real here, right? Law enforcement institution, the institution of law enforcement was white supremacist from the outset of this country, right? It grew out of slave patrols in the South, right? It was a white supremacist institution from its very inception, all right? So to act as if white supremacists infiltrated law enforcement is a joke to me, really. White supremacists invented law enforcement, right? They are law enforcement. All right. So the entire institution of law enforcement has been white supremacist from its inception in this country. All right. So she goes on, Diala Shamas goes on, she says, but instead, they developed an absurd framework justifying their surveillance and investigation of Black Lives Matter activists, concocting weird labels like Black identity extremism and then racially motivated violent extremism. So she links to an Intercept article. We can check it out in a sec. The FBI, it's titled, "The FBI Spends a Lot of Time Spying on Black Americans." All right. and of course of Muslims under debunked and completely flawed radicalization theories. So she links, she's just linking to these stories. One in the Chicago Tribune, how a suburban filmmaker sued to find out why the FBI was watching her, and spying on her, essentially. So under the terrorism designator, these agencies mobilize insane resources to infiltrate mosques and target religious communities. She links to a client giving a glimpse of what happened when the FBI tried to coerce him to spy on his community. All right. So she says, this is where the terrorism label leads. I know we're angry and many are actually feeling terrorized. That's legitimate, but it's a trap. Let's build on movement calls to question the role of law enforcement, including here when they appear to be the problem, not the solution. So many other really smart people have made this argument very thoughtfully, applying an abolitionist lens. At Atia Hussein reminds us that, quote, the racial history and significance of the concept is constitutive of the concept of terrorism. This was in Boston Review. So, and links to this idea of we're on one hand, the left is calling for police abolition, right? We're supposedly police abolitionists. We want to defund the police. And what it's saying is if we're not careful here, by playing into these calls to label this as terrorism, what we ultimately may do is antithetical to our very ideology, right? We're trying to defund the police by calling these people terrorists. As much as it may feel good for us, right? It might feel good. What it may actually, in fact, lead to in the real world is more attacks against Black Lives Matter, more empowerment of expanding the carceral state. And ultimately, white supremacy still continuing to get the pass and slap on the wrist that it gets, while increasing the suppression of Black Lives Matter, Antifa, and these sort of left-wing organizations who have frequently been labeled as domestic terrorists by folks like Trump, right? So she goes on. I'm just going to finish her thread here. She says also, DCLI thoroughly breaking down how counterterrorism is inextricably linked to U.S. imperialism and how the industry of terrorism experts, those who will be called to opine on and implement the current push, is, well, racist. Listen for more nuance. So she's just dropping these links, and then she finishes off this thread by saying, and this is what I noticed. I had before this came out, I was talking about this, saying, listen, if we do this, if we by playing into this and feeding into the calls to label these people as domestic terrorists, what we're ultimately doing is enabling the liberals, to create new laws and expand the carceral state in a way that will ultimately be not used by the existing white supremacist institutions to fight against white supremacy. Why the hell would we believe that all of a sudden the FBI, DOJ, CIA are all of a sudden they're going to be using this to fight against white supremacy when they literally were built, on the premise of white supremacy and have always existed as white supremacist institutions? Why we suddenly think that we should empower these institutions, and that somehow, it's going to play well for us, right? So, in regard to that, she says, predictably, Biden falls for it. I'll say it again. History shows that legislation going after, quote, domestic terrorism will primarily be used to target Black organizers, Muslim communities, immigrant communities. It's the oldest play in the book. And she just posted this quote that was taken from a Wall Street Journal article. And it says, Mr. Biden has said he plans to make a priority of passing a law against domestic terrorism. And he has been urged to create a White House post overseeing the fight against, quote, ideologically inspired violent extremists and increasing funding to combat them. So what we have here is Biden saying, listen, we are going to expand the carceral state. We're going to increase funding. We want to increase funding to police to combat this idea of domestic terrorists, right? And they don't narrowly define it as white supremacists. Nothing in this is a narrow definition under white supremacy. It specifically says the fight against, quote, ideologically inspired violent extremists. Well, could that label not be applied to, say, Antifa? They are ideologically inspired, quote, violent extremists. When they say punch a Nazi in the face, right? That's violent. That's ideologically inspired. We got our president of the United States calling them extremists and terrorists, right? So if we don't see it, it may feel good because, oh, we're going to have a Democrat in power for the next 4 years. But we have to remember that these laws stay on the books even after Democrats leave, right? So, and we know how they will ultimately end up getting applied, right? So, all right, let's, let me, so this is my big concern here, right? And I know, and like I said, I'm going to get to all the comments in a second. Please, if you're just joining us, do me a favor, hit the like button down below, subscribe to the channel, share this on social media, right? But what we need to recognize here is that, what we're saying, there are consequences. There's power behind words, right? And words, and to say that, if we just fall into the same camp as these liberals that are just, oh, well, these are domestic terrorists. Let's look. I mean, we could look at the exact events of what they did, right? A massive group of people, right? They showed up there to a rally, right? And then in protest, what I saw, I'm sorry, like, I'm just being real. You can call me a softie and a fascist sympathizer, like a fascist apologist. Come on. I mean, these people are fascist insurrectionists, right? I have no problem calling that whatsoever. I'm not friendly to these people. All right. The issue that we're talking about here is that, applying the word terrorist, it holds a weight to it, right? And we know what that weight ultimately results in. It typically results in a loss of due process, right? When you label someone a terrorist, it suspends things like habeas corpus, right? If somebody's labeled a terrorist, then they don't have a right to a speedy and fair trial, right? We can just arrest people, and the government can just arrest people and hold them indefinitely. And who did we see getting snatched off the streets during Black Lives Matter protests, right? Black people, brown people, trans people, right? In New York, there was a video of a trans woman just getting snatched off the street, thrown in a car, in an unmarked car. And we don't know, who the hell knows what happened to her, right? Who knows what happened to her at this point, right? But if we don't recognize that, if we don't fight against this stuff, and we have to fight against it, it's not just when it's against our folks, right? That's not the only when you really have to fight for it, is even to be principled on it, is to say it even when it's somebody that you completely disagree with, right? That's when it matters most, right? Because otherwise you're not principled, and then you don't really hold the principle, and so you're not you lose your credibility. If you don't hold it a principled stance on it, you lose credibility on the issue. And so how you feel about how it should be applied doesn't really matter, because you're not someone that wants to apply a principle, even-handedly, right? So I don't know. I know that it's the reflex in this situation is to want to say, well, these people are terrorists. They did, they terrorized people. They made us feel fear, right? These are terrorists. And to also say, well, they call Muslims terrorists all the time, so we should call them terrorists. Listen, we cannot take the stance on the left that we want to just sort of, have the correct proportionality of, police violence or state violence against, activists, right? We don't just want it to be, oh, we want the police to be just as brutal to white people. We want the police to shoot unarmed white people at the same rate that they shoot unarmed Black people. No, we should want police to stop shooting unarmed people, period, right? I take the stance, I don't care that, an unarmed woman was shot in the neck by cops. If you don't take the stance that you think that was wrong, that is a, yet another case of police, violence, police brutality, that cop should be held accountable for killing somebody, an unarmed person. Why did it need to rise to the level of shooting somebody and to shooting to kill? You're shooting, not at the leg, not at, you're shooting to kill at that point, right? An unarmed person, I don't care what they're doing. They're just an unarmed protester. I don't care. Oh, they're storming a building. You know who else, took over a building and occupied the Capitol building? The Sunrise Movement. to protest climate change. Like, they took over Nancy Pelosi's office. Are you saying that if somebody takes over a congressional building, it occupies a congressional building, that justifies police murdering those people? Because let's be very careful about that, because we know how it will get turned around and how it will be used. All right. And we can't just think in terms of, oh, well, when the Democrats are in power, or when people that are on our side are in power, how we feel about these laws. We have to recognize that the laws usually get established under, oftentimes are established under Democratic, control of government, and then they get applied during, GOP or fascist control, of government, right? So let's, I think I got a few more things that I want to take us through. For one, here, let's take a look. AOC came out on, in response to this and had some thoughts on it, shared her thoughts on this. So let's take a look at what AOC had to say on the matter. So this is AOC, and she's responding to this tweet from a liberal, Democratic consultant and such, Norman Ornstein, and resident scholar at the American Enterprise Institute, and a contributing editor for the Atlantic magazine, right? So, a liberal journalist, and Norman Ornstein says, the House must, as an immediate step, pass a domestic terrorism statute with a focus on white supremacist terrorism and send it to the Senate. So here you have a liberal calling for increasing the, creating new laws, putting new laws on the books against domestic terrorism, with a focus on white supremacy, and saying, calling for increasing the laws against domestic terrorism. To which AOC responded, she said, as the vice chair of the oversight subcommittee who ran investigations into domestic terror laws, I respectfully disagree. Our problems on Wednesday weren't that there weren't enough laws, resources, or intelligence. We had them and they were not used. It's time to find out why. All right. So here AOC is saying, listen, it's not that there aren't enough laws on the books. We've got laws on the books. We've got the resources and the intelligence. We just didn't use them, right? The FBI knew about this stuff. They knew that people were coming in. In fact, the FBI has recently come out and made a statement saying that they warned people against coming and showing up to these protests, right? So they knew about this. They were aware of this. They have all the resources they need. They have all the funding they need. We know this situation, that the police have plenty of funding. All right. They have all the funding they need. It's not for lack of funding that this was allowed to happen. All right. It was because the institutions are themselves white supremacist, right-wing, proto-fascist institutions that will always be friendlier to fascism than to socialism. All right. And so, I think that this was actually a really strong stance by AOC, and I commend her for taking this stance and for coming out and speaking out against it. And I think that we just have to be very careful in how we apply these terms into how we use these terms, because I do think that they have an ultimate impact. And what they do is they allow, it creates a public pressure on politicians to respond to oh, well, if this is terrorism and everybody is angry and they want, their calls for, they want justice, and they're saying these people are terrorists. Well, if the legal definition of terrorism doesn't cover these people and the laws on the books don't already cover these people, well, then that requires an expansion of those statutes, which we know if we do not dismantle the white supremacist institutions and we simply add laws onto the books into these existing white supremacist institutions, then we have to recognize how that is going to be applied. It is not going to be applied to the white supremacists. All right. It's just not. All right. They're not going to apply those laws to the white supremacists. All right. They will continue to get slaps on the wrist, and ultimately it will be used to harm Black and brown people. All right. So I just, and to increase funding to police, something that we say is completely antithetical to what we believe in, to our ideology. All right. So that's my thoughts. All right. I know that it's not a popular stance. And I think it's unfortunate that this is not a popular stance, because I really think on the left, we have to take a clear, strong position on this, and to resist the urge to label these people as terrorists, right? Like, it's in the vein of like, well, they call the Muslims terrorists. They call Black people and BLM activists terrorists. All right. Well, the goal shouldn't be to get them to be called terrorists. The goal should be to get BLM and Antifa to stop being called terrorists, right? So we just have to be careful about how we feed into this, because it's always during times of when there's a lot of fear and anger that they use that to get us to give up and relinquish our civil liberties, right? The Patriot Act of 2001. We were all so afraid of these so-called terrorists attacking the United States that we fed into this war on terror. I know I was there. In 2001, I was young. I was like 13 or 14, I think 14 years old at the time when 9/11 happened, and I fed right into that sort of jingoistic, oh, these people are terrorists, we need war on terror, let's supporting this war on terror. And look what it led to. It led to never-ending wars that have killed hundreds of thousands of civilians, if not more than 1 million civilians over in the Middle East, and ultimately, destabilize that region and destabilize the world, right? So we spent trillions of dollars on these never-ending wars that have done nothing to make us any safer, and ultimately make us less safe, because by not spending that money here at home on things like creating, federal job guarantee, making sure everybody has a job, has a decent wage. Like, trust me, people whose lives are going okay, they don't do government insurrections when people's lives are okay, right? When people's basic needs are being met, right? You just have too much to lose to go do stupid shit like that, right? So I don't know, call them rioters, looters, fascist insurrectionists. I think that's all fair game. I just think that it's dangerous when we, in our rush to label them as domestic terrorists. And if you want to, and if you do that, you have to make sure that in every breath that you're calling these people terrorists, that you're turning around and saying, yeah, they're terrorists, and we do not need more laws against terrorism. We need to use the existing laws. But honestly, I mean, I'm in the camp of like, we need to get rid of these laws on terrorism, this idea of terrorism, because we have laws on the books to prosecute violence, right? We have all the laws that exist. We don't need to create new laws that say that because you're a terrorist, we can suspend due process, right? That's all that these terrorism laws do, is they allow the state, right, to go around due process, and if we let that be applied to American citizens, that is quite the slippery slope there that we must be extremely careful of, right? So I urge people to please be cautious in trying to label these people as terrorists. The same labels could be applied to Sunrise Movement, to Black Lives Matter. I mean, there was a guy who, shot and killed 5 cops who identified with Black Lives Matter. It happened during a protest, during a Black Lives Matter protest. Do we want that? Do we want to allow them to then say, okay, well, if you have anyone amongst your ranks, even if it's, you got a large movement, thousands of people show up, nobody has weapons from what I saw in the crowd. These people were not armed. From what I saw, no, I didn't see a ton of guns. I didn't see a bunch of armed people. The people that got into the Capitol building, I didn't see people wielding guns or anything like that. I just saw people walking around doing stupid shit. This was very disorganized. They didn't appear to have a plan to go in there and kidnap these lawmakers and try them in these fake tribunals and execute them like they wanted to do to the Michigan governor. Those are much closer and much easier to sort of label acts of terrorism. What these people are doing, honestly, I mean, even if we disagree with the people, and we can totally disagree with their points, they totally disagree with us, right? On the idea of Black Lives Matter. But those can be seen as, politically, ideological, violence and extremism when you have one person amongst the ranks that goes and punches somebody, punches a Nazi in the face, punches the cop in the face, something like that. All of a sudden they can label the entire group of us terrorists. And then what does that allow? That allows them to just snatch us off the street, take us into custody, not have to charge us with anything, hold us indefinitely, not give us access to lawyers. So just be very careful in what we're doing, and recognize that ultimately this stands to backfire against the left and against Black Lives Matter and against Antifa. And that's how it's historically been used. That's how these laws are historically used. Even laws that got created during democratic, government control, right? I should have had ready and pulled up, the law that was created, the 1996 laws against terrorism. Let me try to pull that up now and show you that this happened that's Bill Clinton, right? So let me pull that up and show you. And this is what suspended habeas corpus, right? This is the law that allowed them to suspend habeas corpus in the case of what is it? When you label somebody as a terrorist, right? It allows them to suspend habeas corpus. Sorry for using Wikipedia right here, but it's a quick search, so I'm just using Wikipedia. Sorry, just deal with it. But here we go. The Anti-Terrorism and Effective Death Penalty Act of 1996, and you can see here that the Anti-Terrorism and Effective Death Penalty Act of 1996, introduced by then Senate Majority Leader Bob Dole. It was signed into law by President Bill Clinton. All right. So, this was in response to the Oklahoma City bombing, right? And it's, controversial for it changes to the law of habeas corpus in the United States, right? Which is what entitles you to a speedy trial, right? So this is how under Democratic control, so it says the AEDPA had a tremendous impact on the law of habeas corpus. Limits the power of federal judges to grant relief unless the state's court's adjudication of the claim resulted in a decision that was whatever. I'm not going to go into reading all that. This is what we risk, right? So, we risk suspending our civil liberties out of fear, stoked by just our opposition to some frightening event or group of people. So, and we put these laws on the books. They don't get used against white supremacists because they historically just have not been, and then ultimately they end up getting used against black identity extremists. Right? I won't be surprised. Hell, I'm probably being watched by the goddamn FBI. They probably got this, all the shit we talk about here. You don't think that they're watching, you don't think that they're listening, and you don't think that they're following along with every, black leftist, they're probably watching all of our social media, shit like that. And we just got to be super careful about how we apply these things. All right. So I'm going to take some comments and then take off, because I think, I passed my 30-minute mark that I was trying to aim for here. So do we got some comments that we want to get to? Tammy says it's not coddling right wingers at Capitol Hill by not labeling all of them terrorists, because it was technically just a protest/riot. They just got away with a lot and were allowed to enter, and they were allowed to enter so easily because their goals align with the police, right? Yeah. So the police just ushered these people into the building, right? Imagine being ushered into a building, be allowed into a building, right? And then you because you're in that building, all of a sudden you can be labeled as a terrorist and shot, and you don't deserve the same outrage when police shoot you dead after you were just let in by cops. I just don't see how this is much different than Sunrise Movement, occupying the building, occupying Nancy Pelosi's office. Do we want them to be able to just label them terrorists and shoot them with no accountability or anything like that? I certainly don't. Tammy goes on, we don't need more laws or more harsh punishment on domestic terrorism. It's that the existing laws aren't being applied to white supremacist and fascist groups, but they're over enforced on black and brown groups. Exactly, precisely. Making more laws in a white supremacist serving justice system just means more laws fascist and white supremacists can get away with, or just a slap on the wrist. Yep, absolutely, absolutely. What Up America says, agreed 100%. This is so much worse for protesters that have a good reason to be fighting back. Great point. And thank you. Thank you for, I love that our community is recognizes the dangers of this. And that is an invigorating feeling for me. And I'm happy for that. I'm really happy for that, because I was afraid it's going to get a lot of pushback on this issue, because I know it's just not a popular stance to take. But you know what? It wasn't a popular stance in the wake of 9/11 to say we should not be going to war in Iraq, right? It was not a popular stance. Look at the vote in the House, right? Every single Democrat in the House voted for it, except for Barbara Lee, voted to authorize use of military force, right? That has been used over and over again for the past 20 years, 20 years now. This law has been used to commit to engage in illegal wars all over the globe, right? In Africa and Asia, Middle East, right? So we got to recognize that, right? Tammy goes on. She says, the difference with the riots at Capitol Hill is the overall riot wasn't terrorism. It was a protest/riot. But the upcoming planned occupation of DC by a lot of the same Capitol Hill rioters will be terrorism, because they're planning to essentially prevent people from leaving hostages, and will be armed, and have declared that if they needed, they will incite a civil war. That's literally a threat of violence against the nation. So yeah, I agree in large part. I think that that's something that I want to cover in really think through more, and think about how we apply this. I mean, yes, that would be much closer and much easier to apply the label of domestic terrorism to. I would agree that will be a particular. I mean, if they are allowed to do these things, and they actually start to, and they attack anyone, they harm anyone, or they actually do what they were planning to do and surround the buildings, and hold people hostage within the building, not let anyone leave the building after that point. I think that we can still, the argument can still be made, and the debate should still be had. It's for political aim. Yes, that falls under terrorism. Do I think that those people should have their due process suspended? No, I think that we should prosecute them the same way. That's a violent act that we have laws on the books that we can use to prosecute these people, and I don't know that we need the word terrorism at all anymore. Like, I don't even know that I want this to exist at all anymore, because of how it gets applied and what it ultimately ends up doing. I'm not sure, but that would be much more aligned with the idea of what we would call terrorism. And we'll do a whole segment on that. So I don't want to get into that too much, because I need to do a segment on that and think through all the journalistic implications of even, sharing that and talking about that. I don't want to censor either, or self-censor. Corey Saylor says, being labeled terrorist has a very specific legal implication. These people stormed a building. They didn't cut someone's head off and put it on the internet. You lower the threshold for what is terrorism. That will backfire, and that threshold will be lowered again and again until all dissidence is labeled terrorism. Thank you, Corey. Such a great point. Corey Saylor goes on. It also ignores the fact that while Trump may have caused the riot, we need to talk about what caused Trump. Great points here, Corey, right? You talking about getting to the root cause of these things, right? And I would argue, Trump, what he did was more aligned with stochastic terrorism, right? You say things that will ultimately lead to violent acts against people, right? That's what is known as stochastic terrorism. Essentially, he's stoking terrorism through his speech and what he's saying, right? And that's such a great point. And I think that we got to start, and that's a point that lawyer, Diala Shamus, was trying to make, is that we have to look at how, by just labeling these people as terrorists, it allows people to not go deep on the issue, to have the nuance, and to actually recognize and go after the root causes of these things, right? And so I know it may sound soft and I'm an apologist for, I think that that's just BS and really just ad hominem, because it ignores the actual argument at hand, which is, what is the significance of designating something as terrorist, and what is the implications of it really? And so, yes, I think that we need to just be really careful, because we just know how these things ultimately get applied. And you know, we can call them all kinds of things without having to call them terrorists, because that word holds a legal weight behind it and has legal ramifications. And the legal ramifications are typically a loss of due process, right? A loss of your rights as an American citizen. All right. And so we just got to be super careful, y'all, and think through, you know, what we're doing when we do this stuff, and to be, you know, and to hold a principled stance, even when it's people that we vehemently disagree with, right? Because come on, if you watch this show, you know these people are antithetical to everything that I believe in. I am not on their side. I'm not trying to defend them in any way other than to say that I don't want their, you know, their actions to lead to more harm against Black, brown, Muslim, you know, communities, and any kind of, you know, dissent against the government. All right. Because the definitions that are being floated are very broad definitions that can and will be applied to Black Lives Matter and Antifa. All right. So let's just be super careful about that. Thank you to everyone for all the great comments. Really appreciate that. Please, if you haven't done so, hit the like button down below, subscribe to the channel, share this on social media. If you're watching this after the fact, please leave your thoughts in the comments below. Debate on this. Would love to hear your thoughts on it. I read every single comment, try to respond to some of them. And if anything is thought-provoking enough, we'll do a whole segment about it. We'll pull up the comments and we'll do a whole segment about it. All right. So please share your thoughts. Let me know how you feel about this. Really want to hear it. If you can afford to do so, please support our channel, support independent Black media. We desperately need your support by you know, dropping us $1 or whatever you can afford on Coffee, ko-fi.com/radical democracy. You can also find us on Patreon at patreon.com/radical democracy. Links are in the description box below. Shout out to everyone in our Coffee and Patreon community for just being our inspiration and motivation to continue to, you know, make this happen. You know, just deeply appreciate all of you. So thank you. Yeah, and just yet another shout out to X for that incredible, you know, just the amazing donation. Love you, X. Appreciate the hell out of you, comrade. Just keep doing what you're doing, and just thank you so damn much for helping us to be able to continue to exist. We need to raise a lot more. We need to grow the platform, you know, and in order to do so, we need the funding to increase. So thank you for doing that. I don't even have the words. It's just beyond words. I can't thank you enough. So just shout out to X and everyone else in the community that supports us in that way. I know if we were all rich, everybody would be supporting. And that's the tough thing about doing left media, right? Independent left media. It's very difficult because the audience that we cater to are the people that are struggling most in society, right? Our audience, our community are not people that tend to be doing great, right? It tends to be the people that are marginalized, suffering. And so it's very, very hard to fund, you know, independent left media. So if you can afford it, it's really, really important that you do so. You know, I just can't, you know, emphasize enough, not just my platform, but support other independent, particularly Black and other marginalized left media. You know, we need the support desperately. TYT's got plenty of funding. If you're donating to TYT, if you're watching this and you're donating to TYT, but not to this platform, you're making a huge mistake. All right. They got all the damn funding that they need. They got, you know, I did an appearance on the Vanguard recently, talked with a investigative journalist that covered all of their finances. And we know they got millions of dollars in investment. They don't need your help. All right. It's independent creators like us. I don't think that they even deserve the label of independent anymore, to be quite honest. Once you take $20 million of investment money, how the hell are you independent? But anywho, if you would like to support independent media, please support us. Appreciate everyone. Thank you so much. Thanks for all the comments. I think that's all. Heading out. Yeah, appreciate you all. Peace.